Tracy Walker, I echo a lot of the sentiments that you guys were talking about as it relates to the type of player he was. Those guys who kind of were here before and continued to press, continued to put out good seasons, it sucks to see their careers affected by injury.
Yeah.
You know, this wasn't a player that was just kind of here, just floating by. This was a guy that went out there, and when he could, he did work. And so it's unfortunate that obviously injuries play a role in this, as well as the business aspect of it. You know, this, if anything, is one of those things where you can absolutely say it's not personal, it's just business.
Yeah, Tracy Walker, unfortunately, when it comes to the Detroit Lions, there's nobody that can be more of a cap casualty than him, because coming into the season, if he were to stay with the Detroit Lions, he would have had a cap hit of almost $13 million, which, given the fact that he missed almost all of 2022 with an Achilles injury, was a healthy scratch for the end of the regular season and in the playoffs, and also given the fact that Ife Melifonwu, Kirby Joseph, and Brian Branch are all on their rookie contracts, it's kind of a no-brainer to get rid of Tracy Walker. They save $5.5 million on the cap by cutting him, which that money could be used to assign another player, whether re-sign a guy of our own or re-sign somebody in free agency. 5.5 is a pretty solid chunk of change. I mean, ask Emmanuel Mosley and C.J. Gardner-Johnson for reference. So Tracy Walker, he didn't play in any 4 of the final regular season games or any of the playoff games, and that alone is a bit of a red flag for why he had to go, at least given his contract situation. And when he played, his passer rating allowed when targeted was about 124. Not great. But as I said before, this is a little bit of an ode to Tracy Walker, at least what he did when he was on the field. So this season, I've got a couple of numbers for you that I think a lot of you are going to like. 7 games this season, Tracy Walker had at least 6 tackles, which is what one of the things he did best. He had over 100 in 2021. The Lions were 5-2 in those games. Tracy Walker stepped up big against Tampa Bay and Carolina. Those were both games in which Brian Branch didn't play and Ife Melifonwu did not get any defensive snaps. Also, in the games at Green Bay and at Atlanta, Tracy Walker stepped up in games in which, I know a lot of people don't remember this, but I had to look it up, Kirby Joseph did not play in those games. So Tracy Walker, when he was needed, he did step up and play big. And oh, by the way, he also had 2 games, and I'm a big PFF fan, so I'm going off of this, 2 games in which he had a PFF grade over 70. The Lions were 2-0 in those games. And in the one game that he had a sack, it was against the Raiders. The Lions won that game as well, and that was a game in which Ife Melifonwu did not play a defensive snap. He just got a tackle via special teams. So Tracy Walker, he had to go. And I know we mentioned it a little bit on Big D Energy at Feldman. I might have been a little bit flippant and disrespectful to what Tracy Walker actually did. But when I actually looked him, really did a deep dive into what he did for this team this year, both things can be true. Tracy Walker had to go given the contract, given the depth of the safety, nickel corner, slot corner room. But Tracy Walker played a valuable role on this team at the beginning of the year, especially when some of the key guys like Ife, Brian Branch, and Kirby Joseph, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson for that matter, were not playing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that what I like best about Brad Holmes and this Detroit Lions team is that we've talked about it before. They're not going to be stagnant. They're not going to be stuck in their ways. They're going to do things to continue to move this team forward. They have Super Bowl aspirations. And when we look at what this team is able to do in terms of through the draft and through free agency, I think that this does signal that they're definitely going to be looking at defensive backfield help. Like, it's not a secret in this draft, maybe a little bit more than we probably wondered before. But, Broder.
Yo.
What does this mean for the Detroit Lions?
Well, so Eduardo O'Neill makes a good point in the chat. He says, I knew he was gone when Dan called in the old guard when they clinched, and he did not look happy. Like Flannel said, this is something that just needed to happen. It's nothing about the player, although he was battling injuries, that he lost his job to Iffy, to C.J. Gardner-Johnson, to some other players on the team. But with that contract, you just needed to make this move to both open up cap space to either sign a free agent. Maybe you give that money as part of a 1-year contract to C.J. Gardner-Johnson, to C.D. Deuce. Maybe you allocate it other ways. But I think this is just the first of a few moves that Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, and Mike Disner are going to make to help set up their cap in a way where they can pay Penei Sewell and they can pay Hutch and Amon-Ra, extend Jared Goff even. This is just something that's got to happen. And the fact that they did it before June 1st, and I'm not super savvy in all the details in the timeline, it's not like they would have saved $8 million if they cut him after June 1st, but they would have had, in this year, they would have pushed that money out one more year, they would have had another $3 million to spend in cap space this season. So the fact that they did it now means they have some sort of plan where they're going to address this. And I do believe it focuses around Ife Melifonwu and his development, his breakout. Maybe that's a guy we're going to cover as a breakout player coming up. Ife at 24 at $1.192 million in 24, his contract in 2024. That's just their next man up. That's who they're going to. So it doesn't make sense to give $13 million to a third or fourth string safety.
No, absolutely not. I mean, if we're looking at if Tracy Walker were still on the team, which he is not, when we're talking about the safeties and nickel corners, Tracy Walker would probably be 5 on that depth chart. Yeah. I know that each safety kind of plays a different role, but still, there was not a place for Tracy Walker left on this team, especially given the fact of how Ife Melifonwu really emerged at the end of last year and actually played very well the whole year when he was on the field. Mm-hmm. Brian Branch had a damn good rookie season, and Kirby Joseph, you could actually make the argument when you look at their numbers that Kirby Joseph and Tracy Walker, although different, both of them had kind of meh seasons, at least by the numbers. But the difference is Kirby Joseph still has 2 years left on a third-round rookie contract, right. And Tracy Walker was going to be one of the highest cap hits on the team. And, oh, by the way, Brian Branch still has 3 years left on a second-round rookie contract, and Ife has 1 year left on a third-round rookie contract. So when we're looking at this secondary room, at least when it comes to safeties, nickel corners, slot corners, they're good, but they're cheap. And Tracy Walker really, and the evidence is that he was a healthy scratch for the end of last season and in the postseason. Tracy Walker was really neither at the end of last year.
Flannel, do you think Tracy Walker is a starter on another team? You know, maybe not the number 1 safety or number 1 nickel safety, but a starter or maybe serious contributor on another team.
I think so. If it's a weaker safety room, for sure. I'm not.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Tracy Walker, for a lot of the season, did start some games, did play a role in them winning. So, yeah he could start at another team.
And I was going to say, it kind of leads into this comment by Dark Cass. He says it just means the Lions got better. When you're talking about this Detroit Lions team having Super Bowl aspirations, you talk about that window being maybe 3 to 4 years, maybe centered around your draft picks, your young player, your core. The Detroit Lions have to move into this kind of era of how they manage their contracts, broken down into multiple pieces. Who is your core that's going to get paid? Who are your one-year players that you can bring in to kind of sprinkle in and take this team over the top? And who are your draft picks that can come in and give you some type of a serviceable role that Tracy Walker played as well? When you look at what Ife was able to do on a much cheaper contract, that has to get your ears kind of perked up. And when you have talent evaluators like the Detroit Lions do, these types of cap casualties, they're not going to be the last. You're talking about moving this team forward, not just to kind of tread water like we've seen them do in the past to try and have hope to get to the playoffs, but to actually win a Super Bowl. The Lions getting better, it's going to mean a lot more of these types of deals, and I don't think that Brad Holmes blinks twice on these types of things. Mm-hmm. Obviously, from a personal standpoint, you feel for those things, but Brad Holmes, Jared Goff, the core of this team, they got different aspirations and goals, and it takes a different amount of how you manage this team from a front office perspective to be able to get there.
Yeah, and it was at the end of the day, it was a cap savvy move because Tracy Walker at no time in his career has ever been the player that Ife Melifonwu was last year. Tracy Walker at no time in his career was ever the player that Brian Branch was last year. Even Kirby Joseph to some extent. I know some of his numbers don't look that pretty, but at least Kirby Joseph has shown in his 2 years with the Detroit Lions that he just has a knack for creating turnovers. I mean, he was most famous for intercepting Aaron Rodgers 3 times in 2022 while adding another interception and 2 forced fumbles that were recovered by the Lions. And then, of course, last year he led the team in interceptions with 4. And to top it all off, as I've already said, all of those guys that I just mentioned are on rookie contracts. And Tracy Walker, at the end of last year, the reality is, and going into next year, he's not really good or cheap, at least for what this team needs right now. Just facts. Facts are me.
KG, man. Listen, man, you're one of our ball knowers here, too. What's your take on it all?
Hey, man, you hate to see it just because of the type of person that he was. He was a good person. He was always good with the fans. And from what I can gather, he was good in the locker room as well. But it was just time, man. He was a holdover from the Patricia era. He got off to a solid start in his career, but it just never seemed like he was the same exact player after coming back from injury. Mm-hmm. Then add on top of the fact that we did end up getting a deeper safety room with Ife, with Brian Branch, with Kirby Joseph. So, like Broder said, you can't have a $13 million safety on your defense that's not starting for you. So unfortunately, it just had to happen. But he's a good dude. He will be on another team. Some other team will take a shot on him, and we just wish him the best.